own it.
You know what? It's a long job. We're all set.
So for the record, Representative Frank Edelblut, representing Hillsborough District 38. I rise in opposition to HB 1661. I am not here, however, to speak either for or against conversion therapy per se, but to illustrate that the information presented in support of this measure has been, in my mind, inaccurately presented and includes what can only be described as serious opinion bias. And I want to turn to the bill itself and take a look at these various sections. And I will start with section 1. And I will tell you that this section itself includes in it vernacular such as lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender, which are political vernacular rather than scientific vernacular. All of the scientific research that I have read on this topic, including the scientific studies that are referenced here in this bill, do not defer to political jargon, but simply refer to gender and gender identity. In March 2016, the American College of Pediatricians issued a statement on gender ideology and stating that gender ideology harms children. In fact, what it states from the American College of Pediatricians is that human sexuality is an objective biological binary trait of XY and XX and are genetic markers of health, not genetic markers of a disorder. Number 2, no one is born with gender, everyone is born with a biological sex. Gender awareness and sense of oneself as male or female is a sociological and psychological concept, not an objective biological one. Now I have to tell you that I'm not qualified to parse the science associated with that, nor do I believe that it's the role of the legislature to try and make that distinction and weigh in on this very important scientific topic. With that said, I'd like to turn to the second section of the bill, and in particular we'll start with lines 4, 5, and 6. These lines says the American Psychological Association convened a task force on appropriate therapeutic responses to sexual orientation. The task force conducted a systematic review of peer-reviewed journal literature on sexual orientation and change efforts and issued a report in 2009. Now, what I would like to point out to you is that this language is directly quoted out of the study by the American Psychological Association, and the portion quoted is from the abstract. This is an exact wording, copied word for word, except if we continue, it says, the task force concluded that sexual orientation change efforts can, and I quote the bill now, says, pose critical health risks. Let that sink in. Pose critical health risks. Again, the wording is word for word from this report until you reach those words. The words of the report state, some risk of harm. I dare say that that is an overstatement of what the study is supposed to be representing. That there's a difference between pose critical health risks and involve some risk of harm. There's a difference there. But I will continue. This is lines 4 through 7. Oops, it's my bag. The report makes reference, and so this is lines 4 through 7 are quoted from the report abstract, except for this one part of the language. The report makes reference to those with strongly conservative religious values in this report. And we've not heard that in the bill. In other words, this report that is being relied upon here talks about, and it's quoted, it says, individuals with strongly conservative religious views, but the bill changes this language and calls it lesbian, gay, and bisexual people. I don't know why we're going to political vernacular there, although there is never a distinction, never referenced in the report itself. Number 2, if I continue, I want to walk through some of the aspects of this report in terms of some of the things that it is actually purported to say, because I believe that the bill inaccurately portrays the results of this report. And I will start on, we'll go right to page 2 of this report, and it is what this study actually looked at, okay? Because we're here talking about conversion therapy. And it says, the review covered the peer-reviewed journal articles in English from 1960 to 2007. So that was a period of studies that were being looked at. And it included 83 studies. Most of the studies in this area were conducted before 1978, and only a few of the studies have been conducted in the last 10 years. So we're talking about old research to begin with, as back as far as 1960. I think we still used electroshock therapy back then, but okay. Number 2, it says, we found serious, this is quoting from the report in support of this bill, we found serious methodological problems in this area of research such that only a few studies met the minimal standards for evaluating whether psychological treatments such as efforts to change sexual orientation are effective. Number 2, few studies, all conducted in a period from 1969 to 1978 could be considered true experiments. So of this population, few of them were actually scientifically, rigorous, or quasi-experiments that would isolate and control the factors that might affect the change. Again, that's not the impression you get when you read the facts that are included in this bill. Check this out. None of the research from 1990 to 2007 meets methodological standards that permit conclusions regarding either the efficacy or the safety of conversion therapy. I'm quoting from this report. Now, I'm not here to advocate either for or against conversion therapy. What I'm here to do is to know that if we're going to pass laws, we need to base them on an accurate understanding of the underlying support. But I continue. The few high-quality studies of the SOEC, which is conversion therapy, conducted recently are qualitative. They're not quantitative, they're qualitative, and aid in an understanding of the population that undergoes sexual orientation change, but do not provide the kind of information needed for definitive answers to questions of safety and efficacy. These are qualitative studies. These are not even quantitative, peer-reviewed studies that you can reach a conclusion on. I continue, and I think it's important that I continue. Although the recent conversion therapy research cannot provide conclusions regarding the efficacy or safety, it does provide some information on those who participate in the change efforts. In other words, like of the body of research that was studied, let's look at who they studied. It identified one, this is what we can discern from this, it identified a population of individuals who experienced conflicts and distress related to same-sex attractiveness. The vast majority of the people who participated in the early studies were adult white males, not children, not the stuff that we're talking about in this bill, adult white males. And many of these individuals were court mandated to receive the treatments. Who considered, and these adult white males consider themselves to be consider religion to be an extremely important part of their lives and to participate in traditional or conservative faiths, i.e. Church of Latter-day Saints, Evangelical Christianity, Orthodox Judaism. This bill asserts that this is dealing with the entire LGBT community. I assert that we're dealing with a very narrow slice of the population, which is adult white males who are very religious, not broadly speaking across an entire population. Secondly, most of the individuals studied had tried a variety of methods to change their sexual orientation, including psychotherapy, support groups, and religious efforts. The studies have relied entirely on convenience samples. What a convenience sample means is not an unbiased selection process in terms of who's going to participate in a study and who is not going to. Former participants in conversion theory reported diverse evaluations. This is reading from the study. Diverse evaluations of their experiences. Some individuals perceived that they had benefited from conversion therapy, while others perceived that they had been harmed. So we've got people on both sides. Individuals who failed to change sexual orientation while believing they should have changed with such efforts described their experiences as a significant cause of emotional and spiritual distress and negative self-imaging. Just like you would have negative effects if you tried to quit smoking. Those people tend to have negative effects. If you're trying to break a drinking habit, you have negative effects. If you're trying to break drugs, you have a negative effect. And so they're expressing this concern. Other individuals reported that conversion therapy was helpful, for example. It helped them to live in a manner consistent with their faith. Some individuals described finding a sense of community through religious conversion therapy organizations and valued having others who could be with them. I'll continue. So this is basically what we're saying is there's a balance in the literature, but again, that's not what we're seeing when we read this bill. Recent studies of conversion therapy participants do not adequately distinguish between sexual orientation and sexual orientation identity. This is where I come back to that original point. We've used political language of LGBT here, but there's a difference between gender and gender identity. And that distinction has not been brought up at all in any of the discussion relative to this bill. And I think it's an important component of anybody studying this subject. You know, the available evidence from both early and recent studies suggests that although sexual orientation is unlikely to change, some individuals modify their sexual orientation and other aspects of their sexuality. I could continue. My concern is that I don't know if this would pass an 8th grade bibliography test if we were to try and work on it. But I will continue to press on because I want to get to a certain section in this report where I believe that we've really kind of misstated, and there's many more pieces of information in this report, and I won't take all of your time with that. I want to go to page 42 of the report, because again, turning back to the bill, it's interesting in section 2 in this bill, it goes through, first of all, we've misquoted this, they talk about pose critical health risk to, and then they use LGBT vernacular as opposed to adult white males who are highly religious, is what this study was about. And it talks about including confusion, depression, guilt, helplessness. All of the negative side effects are quoted in the bill, okay? And that is quoted directly from page 42 of the study, where it says, among those studies reporting on the perceptions of harm, the reported negative social and emotional consequences included self-reports of anger, anxiety, confusion, depression, guilt, hopelessness, deterioration, all the things listed in the bill. Interestingly, this bill then stops at the end of that sentence. But do you know what the next sentence in this report states? It says, these reports of perception of harm are countered by accounts of perceptions of relief and happiness and improved relationships with God and a perceived improved in mental health status, among other reported benefits. So again, in 8th grade bibliography, this is not accurate reporting of the underlying results of the bill. The bill doesn't accurately report the underlying contents of the report it purports to represent. And so I will just finish with this one, not my testimony, but that part of the bill. It says, we conclude that there is a dearth of scientifically sound research on the safety of conversion therapy. This is from the report they're using to support the idea where conversion therapy is creating these harms. And again, I'm not trying to advocate for or against. I'm saying we have to be true to the underlying science here. Early and recent research studies prove no clear indication of the prevalence of harmful outcomes among people who have undergone efforts to change their sexual orientation or the frequency of occurrence of harm because no study to date of adequate scientific rigor has been explicitly designed to do so. Thus, we cannot conclude how likely it is that harm will occur from conversion therapy. Let's move on to another section of the bill then. Okay.
Representative?
Yes.
What was the name of that study?
This is the study that's quoted in the bill. It's referred to the American Psychological Association convened a task force on appropriate therapeutic responses to sexual orientation. That's the first line. If you look at line 4 and 5 of the bill, I just went back and read the underlying research that is written in the bill to see if the contents of the bill represent the underlying report. And I would advocate that there's some differences. Okay, I want to continue on, and we could go through all of these different things, but I'm going to just, for the sake of time, I'm going to move forward to the next one, which is section 15. It begins on page 3, line 36. And for this section, basically this is where we've heard again and again this quotation that individuals, particularly students and young people who go through conversion therapy, have an 8 times greater chance of committing suicide than does the normal population. So I was curious about that. And so first of all, to be quoted like that really does disservice to the bill, because the bill doesn't in fact say that. The bill says, minors who experience family rejection based on their sexual orientation face especially serious health risks. One study says that they have the same. So first of all, the study that is being referenced here that talks about 8 times more likely to report of having attempted suicide, 5.9 times more likely to report a high level of depression, 3.4 times more likely to use illegal drugs, 3.4 times. Okay, that study is a study by the official journal of the American Academy of Pediatrics, and I have that study here as well. And it is also, I didn't have to dig these up, they're referenced in the bill itself. I just went and read the studies is what I did, rather than make the implication in terms of what the contents were. And so I guess where I would like to start is, so I initially reached out to individuals who are engaged with this bill, and I said, where's this number come from? And they referred me to an organization called the National Center for Lesbian Rights. And so I contacted the National Center for Lesbian Rights, and I had an email exchange, and I have the email here, with a person named Samantha Ames. And so she was very enthusiastic to try and help me understand where this 8 times come from. And so she basically, she references this study again, and she says that her team studied conversion therapy as an extreme example of family rejection, which is what the statistic is actually in reference to. Meaning that this statistic and the statistics quoted here are about family rejection. They are not about conversion therapy. In fact, you can read the entire report from beginning to end, and the term conversion therapy never appears in here. And so I would also then like to just point out some of the difficulties with the information in the particular report. What I would tell you is that this is not, this report, if the other report was misquoted, this report doesn't pass the mustard for rigorous scientific analysis per se. On page 347, and this was it, the report was included in the Pediatrics volume 123, number 1, so it's not a 347-page report, but it started on that page in that journal. It talks about this study was what's referred to as a participatory research approach. And so anyone who does research understands that a participatory research approach involves selection bias. It's like, okay, so who wants to participate in this thing? And you inevitably have population bias and who jumps in and decides to participate there. So again, if you're trying to reach conclusions, you have to be very careful based on the contents of the report. The next, as it comes down, it says, we recruited a sample of 245 LGBT young, non-Latino, white, and Latino adults ages 21 to 25 who were open about their sexual orientation to at least one parent and a primary giver. Again, that's a small sample size, and then I would advocate as a research paper, it gives you broad information, but it's not a research paper you reach conclusions on with that approach to sampling. Because what you'll notice is that there's no control group in here. In other words, what we have is we've interviewed a bunch of individuals who feel familial rejection because of their LGBT decisions, and then we've basically imputed to them all of their health risks on a broader population. But you have to have a control group to know how that's working, because we don't know if in an error approach. So they basically, they asked questions, and then they said, between the ages of 13 and 19, how often do your parents, caregivers, or caregivers blame you for any anti-gay mistreatment that you experienced? Now bear in mind, we're dealing with 21 to 25-year-olds who are having to recall the number of times that their parents may have shown dissatisfaction to them during the period of time when they were 13 to 19. And again, maybe provide some broad spectrum, but it doesn't provide scientific evidence of harm that you would have to work with. And in fact, the researcher's own admission says, for example, that there are multiple acts of exclusion from family activities equivalent to multiple disparaging comments made by family members, and it's impossible to differentiate the two, right? So what I want to do is, I think that, again, I will emphasize, my testimony here is not so much about conversion therapy, it's about trying to pass good laws that help the citizens of New Hampshire. And I think what we have here is we have an attempt at that. I don't doubt that the attempts of the sponsors of this bill were trying to get to a good thing for the citizens of New Hampshire, but I think we have missed the mark in terms of meeting the appropriate rigor of accuracy, the appropriate rigor of getting good information upon which to base our decisions. Again, I don't want to sit here, I'm not here to debate the merits or the detriments of conversion therapy. I'm arguing that most of the facts that have been asserted in support of this measure have been inaccurately presented, or a correlation has incorrectly been interpreted as causation, or are simply not germane to the discussion about conversion therapy. And so I would just urge you to ITL this bill.
Thank you for your testimony, Representative. Are there any questions from the committee member? Seeing none, I thank you, and I'm going to take a 3-minute recess.
Okay.
Thank you.
And if you need any of this information, I'll provide it here. How you doing?